The story behind the abrupt suicide of Robert E. Howard is a poignant and sorrowful tale. At 30, a vernal age for writers, he left behind a surprisingly large trove of impactful work. Between Solomon Kane and Conan the Barbarian, Howard forged a fantasy genre later defined as sword and sorcery, making him an icon of popular fiction of 20th century literature. June 11th, 1936 was his fatal day, and now the day is celebrated among Robert E. Howard fan circles as a day of celebration of the wonderful man's work. Now I'm going to share a reading written by Robert E. Howard's father, who is a doctor himself, to the wonderful H.P. Lovecraft later that month, detailing the death of his great friend. Dated June 29th, 1936. Mr. H.P. Lovecraft, 666 College Street, Providence, Rhode Island. Actually, it's 66 College Street if there'd be some really deeper occultic ties with H.P. Lovecraft if he lived on 666 in Providence, Rhode Island. So, my dear Mr. Lovecraft, it is barely possible through some other source that you may have heard of the death of Robert E. Howard, my son. If not, I will say that after 3 weeks of vigilant watching at his mother's bedside, on the morning of June 11th, 1936, at 8 o'clock, he slipped out of the house, entered his car, which was standing in front of the garage, raised the windows, and fired a shot through his brain. The cook standing at the window at the back part of the house saw him go get in his car. She thought he was fixing to drive to town, as he usually did. When she heard the muffled sound of the gun, she saw him fall over the steering wheel. She ran in the house and called the physician, who was in the house. The doctor was taking a cup of coffee in the dining room, and I was talking with him. We rushed to the car and found him. We thought at first that it was a death shot by the bullet, but the bullet has passed through his brain. He shot himself just above the temple. It came out on the opposite side, just above and behind the left ear. He lived 8 hours and never regained consciousness. I was watching Robert as this was premeditated, and I knew it, but I did not think that he would kill himself before his mother went. His mother was in a coma and had been for many hours when this occurred. There were 2 trained nurses in the house and doctors there all the time. He did not ask a doctor, neither did he ask me, but he asked a nurse if she thought his mother would ever regain consciousness enough to know him, and the nurse told him she feared not. This was unknown to me, actually. Had I known, I might have prevented this, because I know now that he fully had made up his mind not to see his mother die. Last March, a year ago, again when his mother was very low in the King's Daughters Hospital in Temple, Texas, Dr. McClevey expressed a fear that she would not recover. He began to talk to me about his business, and I at once understood what it meant. I began to talk to him, trying to dissuade him from such a course, but his mother began to improve. Immediately she began to improve. He became cheerful, and no more was said. Actually, no more was said about it. Again this year, in February, while his mother was very sick and not expected to live but a few days, at the time, she was in the Shannon Hospital in San Angelo, Texas. San Angelo is something like 100 miles from here. He was driving back and forth daily from San Angelo to home. One evening he told me I would find his business. What little there was to it, all carefully written up and in a large envelope. In his desk. Again, I begged him not to do it, but he positively did not intend to live after his mother was gone. As the months grew on, his mother showed some improvement. He accepted her condition as one permanent improvement and one that would continue. I knew well that it would not, but I kept it from him rapidly. 2 weeks before she died, she began to decline rapidly. I saw the awful worry that came over him. I was following him and watching him closely, but did not think he would do anything until his mother was gone. In that, I was mistaken, because he never intended to see his mother die. The night before his death, he assumed an almost cheerful attitude, seemed very much interested about me, as if he intended to take the lead and take care of me. He came to me in the night and put his arm around me and said, "Buck up. You're equal to it. You will go through it all right." He completely disarmed me of the intention of his death. But I knew well what to expect afterwards. He died without ever showing the least return of consciousness at 4 o'clock, June 11th, 1936. His mother lingered 31 hours, never regaining consciousness. I buried them both in the Greenleaf Cemetery at Brownwood, Texas. I selected caskets exactly alike. He had purchased a burial lot a week before this happened. It was in the restricted portion of the cemetery. The purchase carried with it a perpetual upkeep. When he bought the lot, he went to the sexton and wanted to know if it was a bona fide contract and if it would be taken care of. He said to the sexton, "I want to know if the lot will be kept in order. My father and I will go away and never come again." Mr. Bass, the sexton, was under the impression that he contemplated something in which he would go all in, all go, but he did not expect to kill me, but knew the shock would kill me. He was careful to keep nurses and doctors around me, but no doubt thought I would die from shock. And which I think the last few lines he ever typed would indicate. These lines were found on a strip of paper in his billfold, in his hip pocket after he shot himself. The lines follow. "All fled, all done, so lift me on the pyre. The feast is over, and the lamps expire." I do not know whether these words were a quotation or original, but they were typed no doubt shortly before his death. I do not know what was in his mind. I have tried to interpret this as being the last of all the family. The feast, the 30 years of love of the family life in our home. Robert loved me with a love that was beautiful. He loved my companionship above that of anyone else, and every time opportunity afforded, he spent his time with me in preference to anyone else. But being a country doctor and practicing medicine in a country comparatively thinly settled, I was away from home most of the time. But when I was permitted to be at home, our hours were spent pleasantly on discussion of men, women, animals, outdoor life, adventure, history of long-lived frontiersmen, and such like. He was a great reader. It made me so happy to sit and listen. He acquired a knowledge by reading of history that I never knew. Lest I worry you with this, I will close, but will say in conclusion, Mr. Lovecraft, that Robert was a great admirer of you. I have often heard him say that you were the best weird writer in the world, and he keenly enjoyed corresponding with you, often expressed hope that you might visit in our home someday so that he, his mother, and I might see and know you personally. Robert greatly admired all weird writers, often heard him speak of each separately, and expressed the highest admiration of all. He said that they were a bunch of great men, and he admired all of them very much. The Howard Page College of Brownwood has asked for letters of correspondence. If it is agreeable with you, I will furnish them with some of your correspondence to him, as he has some in his files, and they are interested in letters. His books were given to the Howard Payne College, and we will be known as the Robert E. Howard Memorial Collection. It is so arranged that it is possible to add it as friends see fit. If you have a book that you would like to add to it with an autograph, it will be greatly appreciated. Yours truly, Dr. I. M. Howard. I am mailing you a bundle of papers that contains the full of it all. This and other letters pertaining to Robert E. Howard can be found in the Howard Collector, published by Ace in 1979 and edited by Glenn Lord. Now, like you, reading this letter in context, I just found it so sorrowful. It affirms that Robert E. Howard had a vast and enviable knowledge of history to have created such a memorable genre of sword and sorcery. It really would have been impossible for him to have constructed it without the influence of history. And the premeditation behind the suicide is what might be most unsettling and startling from this. You'd hate to speculate what could have been tormenting him so badly. Each June 11th, I usually seek out a bookstore and comb the shelves for their sword and sorcery or fantasy section, seeking a Robert E. Howard reprint. The Lancer novels can still be found in some nooks and crannies at different bookstores. These were published in the late 60s. Howard's rhythmic prose has aged finely and is still a great adventure experience in fiction. This has been a Pulp Arcanum segment. Seek out my Facebook page. I'm also on YouTube. And I have a podcast too for full episodes. Search all those apps. This is JBM. I also have a website and a blog, villainnews.com or thepulparcanum.blog.